Action.
Hello, this is Group 4 for History and Psychology's Chapter 12, Prisons, Asylums, and Education.
Featuring
Gabrielle Marks,
Jackson Prescott,
Kayla Franklin,
Danielle Clark Bradley,
Raven Cobb.
Theo Hall.
Oh my goodness. That means we didn't change the order.
no, it's fine.
We can do that later.
So, mental asylums. What are asylums? Asylums were facilities created solely for housing and caring for the mentally ill. There's a stigma around them that they are bad places where mentally ill were mistreated. And this is true, but asylums were a needed improvement over what was offered for the mentally ill before asylums were created. From ancient Egypt even today, there's been a stigma around mental illness. In the Middle Ages, mental illness was thought to be demonic possession. Before asylums or hospitals, caring for mentally ill was mainly up to the family members or the church. If one did not have family, then they were left on the street to beg or in jail. The only places that could take care of the mentally ill were a few expensive private hospitals. And around 1815, the need for public care for mentally ill became apparent. Public asylums became established around the country thanks to the help of Dorothy Lynn Dix.
In 1842, Dorothy Lindex traveled to Cambridge Corrections to teach young women. And while there, she witnessed mentally ill people being sexually, physically, and emotionally abused. They were locked in their own filth, locked up in the dark, in rooms. So in 1843, she went out of her way and devoted her rest of her life to making these changes. First, she went to the Massachusetts legislature and demanded reforms for the mental ill. Next, she asked Congress for 5 to 12 million acres of land for the mental illness and for the deaf and blind people as well. Since none of this was still not getting done and the reforms were still little, she went to the Pope and she discussed mentally ill conditions back in the United States. And with that going on, the Pope started reforms for the mentally ill.
So the treatment of mentally ill before reform. Most mentally ill were kept in almshouses or jails. Almshouses were charitable shelters for the poor that often housed mentally ill. If a mentally ill person was not on the street begging or in an almshouse, they would be in jail. In jails and almshouses, the conditions were horrible. They were kept in closets, cages, pens, and they were often kept naked in their own filth. Jails and almshouses were not meant to treat or fix the mental illness, but only house mentally ill and keep them under control. They would use techniques such as ice water baths, isolation. They would beat them or forcefully restrain them to keep them under control. Dr. John Galt was the head of Eastern Lunatic Asylum in Williamsburg, Virginia. It was the very first public institution solely for the care of mentally ill. Dr. John Galt implemented moral treatment of the patients and introduced new practices like talk therapy. He also focused on helping the patients become better and able to live on their own rather than be released from the institution rather than being kept there for life. The psychological effects of mental illness. Almshouses and jails made no effort to treat mentally ill, they just housed them and kept them under control. The purpose of asylums was to house mentally ill, but in a more caring environment than the alternative. There wasn't much effort to treat their illness. Asylums held patients for life instead of focusing on getting them out. Treatments that were done were not effective and they would isolate them and dunk them in cold water, which did nothing to help with their illness except for keep them under control. There were many options for rehabilitation until the first asylums, like the one opened by Dr. John Galt, that focused on outplacement. And the treatment of mentally ill back then breaks all the APA ethics codes that we have today, specifically sections 3.03 and 3.04, which includes causing physical harm and torturing.
When it comes to prisons, the question is always, what is their purpose, to punish or to reform? The romantic impulse led to changes in the treatment of prisoners. It is a liberal belief that people are born good and can be made better. The idea of penitentiaries come from this concept. They would make the convicts better, whether through punishments like beatings or penitence like charities. The Auburn Penitentiary the first Auburn Penitentiary was opened in 1816 in New York. It established a disciplinary and administrative system based on silence, corporal punishment, and group labor. By 1812, there were 12 Auburn penitentiaries throughout the country, and they became the model for other prisons. Before the Reformation, prisoners lived in unsavory conditions. Being in prisons was comparable to being executed. These prisons were corrupt, and prisoners who couldn't pay the wardens were often left to die, or they weren't fed, or they weren't given water. The buildings were dilapidated, and they had open sewers. After the prison reform introduced literacy programs, prison libraries, less physical punishment, commutation of sentences, and the separation of women, children, and the sick.
Dorothy was a social reformer who advocated revolutionary reform for the mentally ill to improve treatment and to improve the quality of life. In 1841, Dix visited Cambridge Prison in Massachusetts. She classified the conditions horrific for insanes to live in. She said the inmates were underfed, dirty, and were chained to walls. Some other contributors for the Reformation was Samuel Howe, who championed the improvement for publicity-funded prison reforms, and also Louis Dwight, who founded the Boston Prison Discipline Society, who spreaded the Auburn system throughout America's jails.
After denouncing Calvinism and later adopting Unitarianism, Horace Mann took his talents to politics and became the president of the Senate. His biggest achievement was creating the Board of Education in Massachusetts because it unified the school systems and made it so everyone had access to the same education.
With the creation of public schools, Mann wanted to make them better and improve education data and teacher preparation. He could achieve that along with more state funding.